Viva la Raza. Long live the people. To anyone outside of wrestling, that term would probably be something prescribed to a gathering of Mexicans who are proud of their heritage. I wouldn't know. But to wrestling fans, Viva la Raza only conjures up one image, a singular image of a martyred man, someone with so much talent who could have gone as a has been or should have been into an always will be and always was. Someone whose demons with drug abuse and alcoholism could have cost him his career, but rose through it through perseverance, faith, and determination to rise to heights never before seen and we may never even see again. Viva la Raza. That is the call sign for one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, Eddie Guerrero. And on this day, 10 years ago, the wrestling world lost one of its shining stars, taken from us all too soon, just on the precipice of even greater heights. For those of you who are unaware of him, I would like to talk about him a little bit. I may flub and stammer a bit. This is off the cuff, but I just want to talk about my experiences with this legend, Eddie Guerrero. I first got a taste of him during the Monday Night Wars. I didn't have much cable back then, and what little cable I could get was from going over to my aunt's place. Of course, back during the mid 90s, the so-called Monday Night Wars pitted WCW, owned by Ted Turner, up against the then WWF, owned by Vince McMahon Jr., or Vincent Kennedy McMahon. It always came down on Monday nights. You would watch the first episode stammering a bit. WCW's Monday Night Nitro always came on for 3 hours, an hour ahead of the WWE's mainstay Monday night show, Monday Night Raw. Of course, watch the first hour of WCW, then switch over to Raw, and switch back and forth to see which one was better. It was a great time to be a wrestling fan. You had no shortage of greatness in this era. It's the same era that gave us such moments as Hulk Hogan betraying the world by joining Scott Hall and Kevin Nash to form one of the most powerful stables in wrestling history, the NWO. It was a time when a bald-headed, muscular guy went on to have one of the greatest streaks in professional wrestling. It was a time when another bald-headed man, anti-authority, anti-establishment, foul-mouthed, beer-drinking, badass brawling, would go on to become one of the most popular wrestlers to ever step in the ring. It was also the time where two men pushed the limits of what you can do on camera and what you can say when they founded one of the most controversial groups in wrestling history, DX. But lost in the shuffle was a mullet-wearing Latino by the name of Eduardo "Guri" Guerrero, or Eddie to his fans. He was a part of the WCW's very prominent cruiserweight division, a division for the lighter superstars, for the luchadors, or the Japanese wrestlers who the American audience never got a chance to see. We're talking about stars like Rey Mysterio Jr., Ultimo Dragon, Psychosis, and many, many others that I'm blanking on right now. Eddie was a phenomenal talent, joined always by his side by his nephew, who could easily be considered a brother to him, Chavo Jr. He would go on to become one of the mainstay heels of the company. Fantastic in-ring performer, his entire life was dedicated to professional wrestling. Like many others, he is a legacy wrestler, in that his family has deep ties to professional wrestling. Out of El Paso, Texas, everyone knew about the Guerrero family. Eddie's father and uncle were great champions of their own right for many of Mexican promotions. The Guerreros are synonymous in the South with wrestling, as the Hearts are synonymous with wrestling in Canada. Eddie would of course have many runs with the cruiserweight title, as well as tag team title success and independent success as well. He had worked with various other promotions such as Mexico's AAA, New Japan Pro Wrestling, ECW Wrestling, getting his start in WCW before joining with the WWF. Him jumping the ship was marked as well as a chunk of other. It was marked with a chunk of other wrestlers who will become known as the Radicals. Alongside him would be the Man of 1,000 Holds, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn, and the Canadian Crippler Chris Benoit. They didn't have much of a great start. The Radicals, were a solid heel group. They didn't make much waves. In fact, many of them pretty much writ them off as not being able to amount to anything much in the WWE. But two would of course stand out: Eddie and his best friend Chris Benoit. The two would break off from the group and go on to greater heights, with Eddie formulating his now famous persona of Latino Heat, a lovable Lothario who would always, as in his words, cheat to win. He would become an Intercontinental and European champion as well as a tag team champion. He is and will go on to become one of the WWE's Triple Crown and Grand Slam champions. For those of you who don't know, a Grand Slam champion is someone who wins all the major belts of a promotion. It's very rare to do. But through it all, Eddie was of course marred by his years of substance abuse, both with drugs and with alcohol, which impaired him on various occasions I would not like to get into. This would have, of course, hindered him. This would have ended his aspirations for greatness, but he kept at it. These struggles would sometimes be incorporated into his various storylines, which were pretty cathartic, if you ask me. He would continue through perseverance, strength of his own will, and the support of family and friends, as well as a renewed faith in Christianity. Eddie would go on to shake off his demons and become one of the most fantastic in-ring competitors of that era. I often call that era the era of the WWE's Wrestling Trinity, consisting of Eddie, Chris Benoit, and the Olympic gold medalist Kurt Angle. If you were around the 2000s and the early 2000s, if you had any combination of those three wrestlers, you would have a solid 5-star match in your hands. Despite how he looked and acted, Eddie was a technical marvel. Highly efficient groundwork mixed with brawling and a varied aerial style. The crowning achievement would come in 2004. When, despite all the odds and a little help from Bill Goldberg, Eddie Guerrero would go on to defeat Brock Lesnar to become a WWE champion, the first of the Radicals to ever do so. And he showed himself not to be a paper champion. He would go on to retain his title in one of the greatest title matches in WrestleMania history against Kurt Angle in a hell of a finish that was worthy of someone who cheated to win. The night was capped off as the second title match pitted Eddie's longtime friend Chris Benoit against WWE mainstays Triple H and Shawn Michaels in a triple threat for the World Heavyweight title. Again, despite all the odds, Chris Benoit won the World Heavyweight title, and in a scene that you just could not write better, even if you had a $1 million script writer working for you. Eddie walked to the ring. The two stared down at each other. Mind you, in kayfabe, they've had their differences. And then they embraced each other. And these two men who got their start together in ECW, wrestling in the bingo halls and in the minor leagues, stood at the grandest stage of them all, both as world champions. Eddie would continue his reign as champion until he was defeated by John Bradshaw Layfield. He would have a later feud with his other best friend, Rey Mysterio, in a highly controversial but nonetheless entertaining feud where the paternity of Rey's son, Dominic, was in question. The two would have a fantastic feud, with Eddie eventually coming out on top. It was a few days before this day, on live SmackDown, that Eddie Guerrero would wrestle against Mr. Kennedy, also known as Mr. Anderson now, and won in the only fashion that he could, by cheating. Sadly, this would be the last live match that Eddie Guerrero would ever wrestle. Several days later, Sunday night, at a live pay-per-view, Eddie was scheduled to not only wrestle but become a two-time world champion. He decided to take a nap just beforehand, and he asked his nephew Chavo to wake him up in a couple of hours. The hours passed, and Chavo went to his hotel room. There, he found his beloved Uncle Eddie, passed away sleeping in his room. It was on November 13th, 2005, 10 years ago today. The hotel room in the Marriott City Center of Minneapolis, Minnesota. That Eddie Guerrero breathed his last. He was only 38 years old. Despite his years of alcohol abuse, and drug abuse, it was none of those that contributed to his death. Instead, he died from acute heart failure. According to his widow, Vicky Guerrero, he had been unwell for weeks prior to his death. But Chavo said that Eddie had been working so very hard and worked to be at the peak of fitness to be ready for Eddie at a moment's notice. It was at the episodes of Raw on November 14th and SmackDown on November 18th that paid tribute, a double tribute, to a fantastic man. Through it all, we saw live testimonials from various wrestlers from around the company, some unbelieving that such a good man who had overcome so much would just pass away like that. All storylines were put on hold. No WWE performer was forced to perform. They could wrestle if they wanted to. It has been a long time since the WWE would have such an outpouring of support and love for a fallen wrestler, not since the tragic accidental death of Owen Hart several years prior. The WWE, of course, gave him the 10-bell salute. TNA, another up-and-coming wrestling organization, paid tribute by dedicating TNA's one of its pay-per-views, Genesis, to Guerrero, which aired on the evening of his death. Ring of Honor hosted their next show, Night of Tribute, in dedication to him, as well as Ohio Valley Wrestling, its WWE's former developmental territory, by dedicating a TV taped show to him. Many wrestlers wore EG armbands to signify that they support and miss him. Chavo Guerrero saw most change out of this. At the time, he was working under a horrible gimmick as Kerwin White, in which he was pretty much just a paper cutter, polo-wearing white guy. The gimmick was immediately scrapped, as he had a match with Christian and paid tribute to his uncle by performing a frog splash. CM Punk and Rey Mysterio also dedicated matches to their fallen hero. And of course there were many video tributes to Eddie. The Three Doors Down song, Here Without You, was used, as well as Johnny Cash's Hurt. It was a fantastic tribute in and of itself. I remember seeing the tributes done to Eddie. Watching many of these wrestlers who I knew were stone-faced and had these intense personas break down and weep. Chris Benoit, the man known for his stoic personality and no-nonsense attitude, wept like a baby. He was so hurt by it. So very hurt. And I even learned a little something afterwards from the testimonials of several of the wrestlers involved. I learned that Eddie had a close relationship with Shawn Michaels, that they shared their faith in the Almighty God and even read scripture to one another. The John Bradshaw Layfield, the man in which Eddie would have one of his most intense rivalries with, shared that he was actually a very good friend of his. In fact, shared on more than one occasion, shared a picture of himself on his wedding day, and Eddie as one of his groomsmen. What more can I say? Eddie, I really can't really do this guy any honors. He is a fantastic man. But moreover, like I said, I'm just doing this shooting off the hip anyway. Eddie was that next year, well, in 2006 anyway, Eddie was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame by his nephew, Chavo, his friend, and his two best friends, Rey Mysterio and Chris Benoit, in Chicago, Illinois. Accepting the honor would be Vickie Guerrero, his widow. It would be at the next night at WrestleMania that Rey Mysterio would win the World Heavyweight title and dedicated the match to Eddie himself. Nowadays, Eddie's place in our hearts is still missing. There's still that void. Anytime anyone does anything, there's always that feeling. Eddie. He could be impish one minute, completely cruel the next. He could make you smile, make you laugh, make you cry, and make you boo. He was a legend through and through. Honestly, he deserves all the accolades he has right now. I know there are many other tribute videos out there, but I just felt I wanted to do this for him. 10 years he's been gone, and the pain is still there. 10 years he's been gone, and people still say Viva la Raza. 10 years he's been gone, and you can't do a frog splash without the crowd going erupting into chants of Eddie, 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 Eddie. 10 years he's been gone, but his Latino heat still burns so bright. 10 years. 10 years you've been gone, my friend. We still miss you. I still miss you. I know my friends at the WrestleCast, Matty J, TWK miss you. Hairball misses you. Dark Mortimer misses you. Griffoon misses you. Legato misses you. Iron Twister misses you. Dead X-Man misses you. Everyone who calls themselves a wrestling fan misses you dearly. And we will continue to miss you as long as this sport endures. As long as someone will willingly lace up the boots and step between the squared circle. As long as there's someone who strives to be better than they are. Who wants to grab that brass ring, to stand at the greatest stage of them all, to be champion. As long as someone is wrestling, Eddie Guerrero will always be missed and remembered. He is a martyred saint, the saint of wrestlers. That's right, you heard me. Eddie Guerrero is the saint of wrestlers. And he is worth our admiration, our respect, and our honor. Viva la Raza.